And welcome to another exciting adventure on Riding Through the Unknown. I'm your host, Michael, and tonight's guest is a gentleman who I had the privilege to meet on location in Texas, and it was during his filming. It was a social visit, but it was great conversation, and he is so kind, and I am so grateful he is coming on tonight to share his new book and his one of his favorite topics. So I will stop muttering my way through this intro and being in such awe of having him on that I will turn it over to the one, the only amazing forensic geologist extraordinaire, Scott Wolter.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that kind introduction. And it was fun to reminisce about that meeting we had down in Rockwall when we were filming one of my favorite episodes, the Rockwall episode, that, we were hoping it would be remnants of some ancient civilization in the distant past. But this time it turned out to be Mother Nature. And um, I was disappointed on one hand, but I have to say that geological formation was one of the most interesting, cool, and unusual that I've ever seen. And so I can certainly understand why people thought there might be a human connection to it, but it was just Mother Nature doing its thing and showing off a little bit. So that was really cool, and it was fun to meet you when we were down there for that.
Yes, and and I appreciate it, and it was so nice of you to let us come and experience what it was like through your eyes and what you were doing and explaining everything. So that was really fun. And I have to say, it was one of those moments where, because I was such a huge fan of the show, I always in the back of my mind am like, I hear that adage, be careful meeting your heroes. But
Because you might
you
be
were
disappointed, right?
right. But you were so kind and everything, and even took photos. And so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And thank you for being who you are on screen, off screen.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I've said this many times. I'm not an actor. I'm just being me, and I never, I never planned to be on TV. That was never something that, I aspired to do in my life. I wanted to be a geologist, and I've been very fortunate in my career to be a forensic geologist and look at a lot of really amazing things and solve mysteries, solve problems. I mean, that's what I do for a living, mostly in the construction industry. But I'll tell you what, when the Kensington Runestone came into my life 25 years ago now, God, it was this past July. Everything changed, and I did the work. Was proud of the work that we did, and it turned out that in this case, I remember thinking to myself when I was writing that report, and I wrote my conclusion that it is hundreds of years old. Therefore, it cannot be a late 19th century hoax, and is genuine. And I thought to myself, "Oh, good for them, they got one." And I signed the report, I sent it, and I thought that would be it. But little did I know that was just the beginning of what would be, a journey for over a quarter of a century now that has led to, I mean, even more amazing things. And, I'm really happy I can sit here today and I can say with 100% certainty that the runestone is authentic. It's arguably the most important historical artifact ever found in North America. And I think we can answer all the questions that arise from it being authentic, like who carved it? Where did they come from? And most importantly, why did they come here to the center of the continent in Minnesota? back in the middle of the 14th century, and I can answer all those questions now. So, um, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I think I can say that my life has been complete in that regard. Although there is a lot more work to do, and really the biggest thing that I'm hoping that I'll see in my lifetime. I'm not going to hold my breath, but that the runestone and this previously hidden history that resulted in the founding of the United States of America is realized, you know, in throughout the world. I mean, right now there's academic pushback. There are forces, larger forces at work that really don't want this story to come out. And now I understand why things like the runestone have been suppressed, and so many other mysterious artifacts and sites have been labeled frauds, hoaxes, and whatever to try to make them go away. But what I've learned, Michael, is that the fakes and the hoaxes, they reveal themselves quickly. And I'm not saying that the rock wall was a hoax by any means. It's absolutely real, but it's not man-made, and it actually revealed itself pretty quickly. We kind of made it look like it was a little tougher than it was to figure out. But those things reveal themselves quickly. It's things like the runestone that are authentic, that just keep hanging around, and the harder people try to kill it, the more it just keeps hanging around. So that should tell you something.
And I'm just kind of curious with everything that you do. What I guess my one question for you I would start with is, why do you think you were the one meant to find that runestone and set you on this path?
Huh. Well, that's I don't know. I mean, I really don't know the answer to that. Although, in some ways, I do think certain people are put in certain situations because they are the ones that I guess can best handle the situation and get to the bottom of it. And I'm not saying that because I think I'm special. I'm not. The one thing that I do have is persistence. And I understand scientific method. I do forensic investigations for a living, and I'm pretty good at it. I've been doing it for over 40 years now. And so I was the right person to do it in that regard, to have, the background, the training to understand how to attack an investigation and what to do in this particular case to get, the data that I needed to draw that conclusion. But the other thing that I will say is, when I when I went to college up at the University of Minnesota Duluth, um, back in 1980, I went up there on a football scholarship. I was going to be a pro football player, and I did have a good career up there. We won a couple of championships, and I did a pretty good job. But I realized pretty soon that even though I played 4 years of minor league ball, that was not going to be the way I made a living. And I was very fortunate to meet a professor who inspired me and became my mentor, um, and challenged me to challenge myself to become a geologist. And I just love everything about geology. It's so logical. And I was when I was young growing up, I would look at landforms, I'd look at volcanoes, I'd look at rocks and say, how did that form? What made that? And it was, those were questions and mysteries that I wanted to know the answers to, and geology was the way that I was able to do that. So, but I think I chose the right profession, and I was a linebacker when I played football. So I'm not afraid of a challenge. And when people step up and knock me on my ass, I get up and I try to knock them back. And that's just the way I'm wired. I played basketball today. I'll be 67 in a couple of weeks. and I still play with the kids, and they still pass me the ball. So I think that is also part of it. I have a will, I have a desire, and I'm not going to quit until I get the answers. And that's how it was with the runestone, because I knew there was an answer, and it was just a matter of doing the investigation, getting the right data to be able to draw that conclusion. But once I drew that initial conclusion, I thought it would be over. I thought, well, good for them, they got one. But it was the pushback that I got from the academic community from people that are in soft science, humanities disciplines. And don't get me wrong, these are all wonderful disciplines. I'm not trying to disparage them, but these people are not formally trained in the scientific method. And I'm talking about archaeologists, anthropologists, historians, runologists, linguists, and so forth. And again, these are all wonderful disciplines. They're very important, but I got pushback from these people in these disciplines that were telling me that I did not understand scientific method and I was wrong about the runestone. And I just sort of said, "Excuse me, what do you mean? I run a lab. I do scientific investigations for a living." And I will say that prompted me to dig deeper, and that resulted eventually 5 years after the runestone was in my lab for the first time, in a book that I wrote called with a linguist, Dr. Richard Nielsen, and that book's called The Kensington Runestone: Compelling New Evidence. And not only do I present my case on the geology, and Dick presented his case on the runes, the dialect, the grammar, the dating, and all of that, but we also investigated the past investigations that had been done on the runestone. And I have to tell you, it was beyond disappointing. The way that they went about their investigations was anything but scientific. And in some cases, it was actually criminal. So I saw people that had already drawn a conclusion and then went looking for the evidence to support the conclusion that they had already reached. And of course, that's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it certainly isn't science. And so, I can answer the question to people, well, why is it that you came to this conclusion and they didn't? Well, the answer is pretty simple. They didn't follow proper scientific method. And, when you're talking about things like runes, dialect, grammar, dating, there's a lot of nuance and interpretation. And, for example, I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. So once I concluded that the runestone was authentic, okay, the rock told me it was real. I trust rocks. I don't trust some people. And if the rock says that it's real, then what that means is that everything in that inscription must be consistent with the 14th century because it's dated 1362, right?
Right.
So that means that everything that the scholars said didn't exist had to exist. And so that prompted me, after all this pushback, and it actually got quite nasty. And I said, F them. I'm going to go find this stuff because I know it has to be there. And I went over to Sweden 5 times between 2003 and 2005. And guess what? I found everything that they said didn't exist. Now, you would think that if these people were truly scientific, that they would have said, "Wow, man, that's awesome. Way to go." But that's not what happened. They just criticized me even more and chose to ignore, marginalize, or just disappear. And this is when I knew for sure these people aren't scientists, because let me tell you how it works. Let's say, Michael, that you came up with a theory that, coffee's good for you, right? You did a study, you published it, and it was generally accepted that coffee is good for you if you drink, 2 cups a day or whatever. And then another scientist comes along, let's say it's me, and I do a new study and I bring in new data that you didn't have. And I drew the conclusion, hey, you know what? Based on this little compound here, by drinking 2 cups a day, it's not good for you. And that's exactly what happened with the runestone. But If you are a scientist, you would look at me and say, "Hey, Scott, nice going. I didn't have that data. So based upon that, I'm going to change my opinion, and I'm going to go with you because look, I didn't have that. I drew the improper conclusion, and I'm going to change my opinion. That doesn't make you wrong. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you smart because you have additional data that has changed what you previously believed. And that happens all the time in science. And that's how you handle it. And you pat the guy on the back. And look, it's happened to me in my career. I wrote a report on a parking ramp that collapsed. Two people were killed. It was a big deal. And actually, a young technician told me, he said, "Scott, I just don't think that's right." And I said, "Why do you say that?" And he told me his reasons. And I said, "Well, let's go take some more samples and take them in this area, right along the interface where the failure occurred. And I'll be damned if I didn't find one tiny little air void that showed evidence of plastic deformation of the grout that had not set up before the failure happened because it was snowing that night, and the grout didn't set up. And he was on site there, and he knew it was cold, and that slowed the setting of the grout, and the failure happened before everything was solid. And I didn't sit there and get defensive because it's not about me being right. It's about getting the right answer. And in that case, we got the right answer. I changed my opinion, and I didn't even have to testify in the court case because everybody accepted the conclusion. And there was a lot of money at stake, and we just had to make sure that we got it right. So I think you get the point, though, don't you?
I do. And I will admit, before we get into the Templars in your book, I do have a friend that was super excited that you were coming on, and
Okay,
she wanted to ask me to ask you a question, and it
fire.
has to do with one of your episodes, and it is, can you go deeper into the Mayans being in Miami?
Well, let's put it this way. There's plenty of evidence, and in that case, you're talking about the linguistic evidence of Mayans, Miami, and I know there were some others that where the names of these places were are believed to have been impacted by the presence of Mayans in those areas. So I do I know for sure that happened. I don't because I don't know enough about the geology, or I should say the archaeology, that would prove, that they were there for sure. But we have plenty of tangential evidence that suggests that there was a presence there. And I don't see why it would be that big of a deal, frankly, because, these people traveled by boat. And if you start in like the Yucatan, for example, and you just sail along the coast, it'll take you right to Miami, for God's sakes. Um, and I don't see why that would be a big deal. And especially when you are looking for something that in your culture is considered sacred, and that would be, this Palygorskite clay that that we talked about on the show. So to me, it's not a big deal at all. That's what the evidence suggests. It was a sacred journey that they were on, and I think we all understand that people will go to incredible lengths for their faith and things that they believe strongly in. And so I guess that's the best answer I can give you. I don't know for sure, but I have no reason to believe that they didn't. And I think that there is evidence that suggests that they did.
Thank you for that. And so, with that coming up, and with talking about the Knights Templars, I would be remiss since you're on the show and the Curse of Oak Island people claim they have found the treasure. And so I know you went to Oak Island and did some work there. What are your thoughts about, is the treasure really found, or is it
Well,
just a part of it and the mystery's still going?
well, I don't watch the show. I've never watched the show. I was on Oak Island in 2008. I spent a whole day with Danny Blankenship. And, what I was trying to do was to see if there was any way that I could track down the 90-foot stone because it was, allegedly it was inscribed. And I thought maybe I might be able to help out with that. But I came to the conclusion after spending the day with Danny that there is no 90-foot stone. And I walked the island and I concluded that there was nothing there. In fact, I remember when we were shooting America on Earth, or just as we were starting, they were looking at the concept of the Oak Island show, and they asked me what I thought, and I said I don't think there's any treasure there, and I don't know what anybody is saying about finding treasure, but if they actually found treasure, I'm sure the world would know. Um, we have documents that say that the treasure was recovered in 1769. We know what the treasure was. We know exactly what happened there. We know we've got drawings of the tunnel system, the mechanisms, a lot of detail. And if they say they found the treasure, well, on one hand, they have found the treasure. The treasure is the show. So in that regard, yeah, they found treasure all right. They've made a hell of a lot of money, but I don't believe they found any Templar treasure because, frankly, the Templars aren't stupid. They wouldn't leave their treasure hanging around, for two brothers to find or anybody to find. We're a little more careful than that.
Uh, I'd have to agree with that, and that goes along with that. I have another friend who is a Knights Templar, and he goes, "Yeah, there is something at Oak Island, not what they think, but we have stuff all over the country. It's not just
Yeah.
one thing." And so,
I mean, who would put all their eggs in one basket? I mean, they lead you to believe that that this is the Templar treasure. I mean, that's nonsense. I mean,
yeah.
nobody would do that, and certainly not the Templars.
And so, what would be, and I'm sure you've written about it, but I'm curious your thoughts on hand is the Templars are worldwide and could go anywhere, hide out, do whatever.
Yep.
What would bring them to America, and what was the draw of making such a presence known here over other areas?
Well, that's a good question. It's more complicated, I think, than people think. The simple answer is, far to the west, like it says on the runestone. They knew about North America and they had been to North America long before the put down, and their ideological and biological descendants had been to North America as well. So it wasn't a secret. But the one thing that they did understand about the Americas, both North, Central, and South Americas, is that the indigenous people embraced the true ideology of the Templars. They venerated the sacred feminine. They they respected the land. They respected each other. They treated their guests with dignity and respect. And the Templars knew this. They also shared rituals with them, and they bonded at a deep spiritual level. And really, at the end of the day, what we talk about in both my new book, which is right here, called The Greatest Templar Tale Never Told, the Sinclair Weems Journals. And I have a new book that's going to be coming out, another book that's coming out this coming year, that is about the Cremona document. And if you think this book is great, and it is really good, I mean the journals really are the story, and what the story they tell is fantastic. All I do is provide commentary and put things into their proper context. I mean, um, everybody that's read it is just dumbfounded at how amazing the story is. And it touches on all the places that they put treasure. They put treasure on Oak Island, and then they recovered it, and the bulk of it was used to fund the revolution. But the whole mission that the Templars started, um, in earnest back in the 14th century, was to establish a sanctuary, a new home. In the journals, they call it a free Templar state. It's also called in the journals the New Jerusalem. Brother Francis Bacon called it the New Atlantis. A place where people of all races, colors, creeds, religions, whatever. The whole concept that we have in our Constitution and Bill of Rights that says that every human being is born with certain inalienable rights. We are all equal, and that's true. I mean, it's absolutely true. And so, what they wanted to do was to establish this sanctuary in a place where they could be free from the tyranny of the monarchs of Europe, free from the persecution of the Roman Catholic Church. And it was those two entities that put down the Knights Templar Order on October 13th, 1307. Now, the Templar Order was not caught off guard, as history will want you to believe. They knew that this was coming, and they prepared for it. And when the church went and raided the treasury in Paris on that day, there was nothing in there. When they went to the western port of France at La Rochelle to confiscate the ships that were loaded with treasure, they were gone and disappeared into history. And this book really begins in earnest at about that point. We know where those ships went. We know where they hid the treasure. We know how they moved it in increments to the west, eventually to North America, primarily in Nova Scotia, in many places, mostly on islands, including Oak Island. And then the mission, which they called the Covenant, which of course is the highest agreement that you can make with your deity, your God, to complete this covenant, which was to establish that sanctuary. And in 1769 and 1770, the time came. Our founding fathers, who inherited that obligation of the covenant, who were pretty much all Freemasons. 53 of the 56 signers of the Declaration were Master Masons. They were also Knights Templar. They just didn't tell anyone. But they inherited that obligation, and they sent 46 young men and 6 slaves. These men were all Freemasons, and they were directed by people like Ben Franklin, George Mason, and some of our other founding fathers that people will recognize their names, to recover those treasures, to bring them back to the Grand Lodge at that time to help fund the revolution. And so that's the story. So we owe this United States of America really is the completion of that covenant, of the establishment of the New Jerusalem, the New Atlantis, that free Templar state. And if you look at the history and you understand what happened at the time of the founding of this nation, we fought a war. The Revolutionary War was against a monarchy, right? The King of England. And, now we're trying to go back to it for F's sake. This is ridiculous. And, the Roman Church, I mean, we have freedom of religion and separation of church and state for a reason. And it goes back to the persecution of the Knights Templar, when the church and the monarchies elevated each other, legitimized each other above the people. And so our founding fathers are the descendants of those Templars that were persecuted by those entities. And that's why they created this nation of the people, by the people, for the people, to elevate the people above the government. And right now, that's being tested. I have no doubt that we're going to survive it. It's just how much damage is the current regime going to do? And I don't mean to get political, but I'm trying to make a point that, I think a lot of our people in government have forgotten our own history. Unfortunately, too many of them on both sides of the aisle are profiting from their jobs, and that's not how it was set up. The biggest problem that we have in government right now is we don't have term limits. We need to have term limits for our people in government. When it was originally set up, the founders envisioned people from all walks of life would take time out and serve their country for a short time, and then they would go back to their practices, back to the farms, back to whatever. But that's obviously evolved into something much different, and we have career politicians that unfortunately, corruption is rampant, and again, it's on both sides of the aisle. And this is not the way our government was intended by our founding fathers, again, who were all Freemasons. Now, you can call me biased because I am a Freemason. I'm also a Knights Templar, but this is the truth. This is our history, and you don't have to look very far to see that everything I've told you is correct.
No, I totally agree, and it's something I've thought about myself. And I'm curious your thoughts on why is it with all the cultures that we talk about through history, that have come and gone. What is it about the Knights Templar that when people hear about it, they're like, oh, wait, I need to dig deeper into this one? And is the draw into that? And on top of that, what got you started into delving into the Knights Templar?
Well, I'll tell you after I asked you how I got into the Templars after I answer your first question. And it's a good question. And when I think about it, I think part of the mystique of the Templars is, if you look at their history, they were revered for their military strength, for their commitment to their jobs, to their chastity, to their commitment to their deity. And I use the word deity as opposed to God because deity is, there's many different types of religion, and there are people that believe in a higher power, like Freemasons, that don't practice organized religion. Unfortunately, organized religion uses fear to basically control people and manipulate them, and that's not the way spirituality is supposed to be. And even though people associate the Templars with the Roman Catholic Church, the truth of the matter is they were anything but Catholic. They pretended to be Catholic to serve their own ends, and they honored the Virgin Mary to the point where some of the popes became a little uncomfortable. All you have to do is study the leader of the true leader, spiritual leader of the Knights Templar, and that's Saint Bernard de Clairvaux, who first joined the Cistercian order in 1113 and wrote the charter for the Knights Templar order. Back and then when the Templars became an official order in January 13 of 1129, it was Bernard that wrote the charter for them. So when you really dig deep and you understand the real history of who the Templars are, they're much more interesting and fascinating than the popular belief or understanding. I mean, look, the church moved against them because they became too rich and powerful, is what you will read if you study them. But and yes, that was true. They were very powerful. They were very rich. But the real reason that the church was pissed off is because they realized who they really were, and they venerated the sacred feminine, and they're not Roman Christians. They were Gnostic Christians, and those that practice the true faith to this day. That's what we are. So we honor the feminine. We don't treat her like she's property. We don't, deify women and elevate men above them as the Roman Church has done since the Council of Nicaea in 325. And this is one of the biggest um, problems that humanity has suffered through and continues to suffer through. And the Roman Church and Roman Christianity is a big part of that problem. Women are just as they bring something different to the table, but men are not better than women. I would make the argument that women have their shit together a hell of a lot better than most of us men. And so the true ideology that Gnostics embrace is a balance. And that's what that hooked X symbol means that was on the runestone. And all through these documents, all through the Sinclair Weems journals, this was what the Templars' true ideology was. And nobody figured it out until we came along. And this leads me to how I discovered the Templars. It was the runestone. And, once I realized that the runestone, or I concluded that the runestone was authentic, I started to dig into, who carved it? Where did they come from? And why did they come here? And I have to be honest with you, Michael, the evidence trail took me right to the Templars. Because when I went over to Sweden those 5 times looking for the language, runes, dialect, grammar, all of that, where I found it was on medieval grave slabs that were mortared into the floors of 92 medieval churches that were on that island. And I went to every church. I'm anal retentive. I'm a lab guy, okay? It took me 2 weeks. And as I was going through these churches, I did a little research. Who built them? Well, it turns out that all 92 were Cistercian. Well, who are the Cistercians? The white monks that were founded in 1195 by Robert Molesme and then taken to meteoric heights, starting with when Saint Bernard de Clairvaux joined the order in 11, some people say 1112, 1113, but in 1115, he founded the first daughter abbey at Clairvaux. He joined the only Cistercian abbey that existed at that time at Citeaux in France, and then he founded Clairvaux. That's why they call him Bernard of Clairvaux. But by the time he died in 1153, not even 40 years later, there were over 300 Cistercian abbeys all across Europe, into Scandinavia, the British Isles, all the way to the Holy Land. And of course, by the year 1300, there were 750 Cistercian abbeys. And what I will tell you is that the Knights Templar are Cistercian monks. They are one and the same with the Cistercians. The only thing is they served a military function within the order. They were the only ones who could travel, except for the stonemasons, of course. And they were the only ones that were allowed to eat meat because they needed the protein so that they could fight in battle, right? But there were other things that the Cistercians did. They tended to large flocks of sheep. They were amazing gardeners, and they had orchards, and they grew food, and they had foundries. They had forges where they were making metal and all kinds of products, and they would go into the cities. These Cistercian abbeys and these Templar commanderies were always out in the wilderness, and they were built associated with water. Streams were flowing through them because they were obsessed with cleanliness and purity. And so I dove deep and I studied them intently because it was fascinating. And it's also interesting to see how their impact on the world. It was the Cistercians and Templar money. They became immensely wealthy um, through agriculture, through commerce. They would, grow food. They would shear the wool off the sheep and sell the wool for clothing. They became immensely wealthy. But it was the Templars who also developed the shipping, right? And they were able to travel and transport the goods. So this was like an enterprise. a mega corporation, if you will, and that's how they became immensely wealthy. People know they were wealthy, but they don't know how they became wealthy. So that's how I got to the Templars. And the deeper I dug into the Templars, the more I realized that they had technology. They understood the stars and how to navigate, and they understood by using geometry and archaeoastronomy to be able to calculate the size of the Earth. Once you know the size of the Earth, you know how far away things are. And believe you me, they knew exactly where North and South America were, where China was, where Asia was. And once you know these things, you know how much food to bring, how much water to bring, and this gives you a huge advantage over your competition and your enemies. So when people talk about this is the Templars, and they marvel at their battle skills, and of course they had that as well. They were also able to through alchemy to be able to make strong light steel and chainmail and armor, and that's why they were so successful in battle, or one of the reasons. So the deeper you dig into the Templars, the more impressed you will get, and it will help you to understand why they became so rich and powerful, why they're so revered, and people find them so fascinating. And then when you start to look at things like coming over to North America and bringing their treasures to found this new Jerusalem, everything makes sense. Everything fits together, as it must when you're doing a forensic investigation and you have the right answer. Because if you're doing an investigation and you have a piece of data that's hanging out there that doesn't fit the thread, you're not there yet. When it comes to the Templars and the founding of America, everything fits. Now it's just a matter of getting the word out there, getting this history accepted, and getting these academics, frankly, off their ass. And the other thing that I found with academia is a lot of these people, even though privately, it's like people talking, like Republicans talking about Trump. Behind the scenes, they don't like him. They think he's a moron. In academia, they know that the Templars were here. They know the story that they're putting out there isn't right, but they don't want to tread on the legacy of their predecessors. And look, as I told you before, it's not disparaging the people that came before you. When new evidence comes forward, if your predecessor doesn't understand that, then shame on them. You go forward, you bring forth the truth, bring forth your evidence, and stand tall. And if your predecessor doesn't like it and he's wrong, well, tough up. If he has integrity and if he truly supports you in the work you're doing, he'll stand with you. That's the way it should be. Not, talking behind your back because, he perceives you're somehow attacking his legacy when that's not at all what's happening. So I get a little wound up when I do this, Michael. Sorry.
Oh no, I love the passion and the information. And one thing that I've come across when I'm, looking into the Knights Templars that kind of makes sense to me, but at the same time, I question it is when in the Holy Land during the Crusades,
Yeah.
they would be friends with the Sultan and his armies. And when they would show up, they'd be like, hey, do we really got to fight this battle? Okay, well, then, yeah, and they give it their all. But then when the battle's over, they're back to, okay, so, what are you doing this weekend kind of mentality. Is that
well,
real
that's
or?
well, it is to a point. Now, what you have to understand is that there are other traditions that embrace essentially the same ideology. In the Muslim faith, we have the Druze, who are Gnostic Muslims, if you will. And so there are things that they have in common with the Templars from a spiritual level, from an ideological level. And so they would meet privately and have their degrees, their rituals. They would treat people with respect. In many ways, it's kind of like sports, right? I mean, I use the analogy when I play basketball, and I talk to some of the young kids, and when we play and somebody does a hard foul, you get in each other's face, you kind of get after it. I mean, what you have to understand is that everybody wants to go home. Nobody wants to go get hurt. You want to have a good workout. You want to compete hard, but then and I just say, look, when I'm on this side of the line and we're on the court, I'm going to fight like a dog and I'm going to kick your ass. But as soon as the game is over and I'm on this side of the line, out of bounds, and the game's over, I'll be the first one to buy you a beer and tell you what a great player you are. And I think sometimes people have a hard time understanding that because you compete so hard, and then, afterwards, these guys in football and all sports, they hug each other and they exchange jerseys because they understand that, everybody has to go home to their family. They don't want to get hurt. I don't want to see a guy get hurt. I hate seeing the other guys get hurt. But, it is part of the game. But in a way, that's kind of what's going on with these traditions because, we're all human. And if you are truly a Templar, you know that everybody else is human and has good days and bad days and families and kids and grandkids and sickness and illness and good times and hard times. I mean, that's just the human condition. So, in that regard, I think what we see with Templarism is people focusing on the human aspects of people. And, when they go into ritual, you are a brother. And it doesn't matter, whose team they're on. It's when you go into these sacred places, you respect the space and you respect the people that are there. And but they have a job to do too. And so once you depart, and you go back to wherever you go back, you may find yourself in battle. But I will tell you, you probably heard stories about Freemasons, like during the Civil War, during the First and Second World Wars, and this is where what's in the news, this whole idea that this drug running, they suspect, they don't know for sure, they haven't presented any evidence that these boats are transporting drugs. They might be, they may not be. That's one problem. But they blast one of these boats and it turns out there's a couple of survivors, right, that are hanging onto this boat. Well, international law says that you need to provide aid to those people because they're not a threat anymore. And I don't want to hear any of this bullshit in our administration that says that they were. They were not. And this is an outgrowth of the whole concept of brotherhood. So if you are in a foxhole and you've got an enemy who's wounded and he's sitting there and he gives you the Masonic sign of distress, you know that he's a brother. You are obligated to provide aid and comfort, even though he's your enemy. And I mean, this happened to Santa Anna. After the Alamo, about a month and a half later, he was a Freemason and he was in a battle and he was being defeated and they were about to kill him. And he pulled out his Masonic apron, he gave a sign, and his life was spared. So it's this tradition that we see going all the way back to the Templars in the Holy Land, all the way through to today. But we just don't have any more Masons in government anymore. And this whole idea of respecting the human condition, we're not seeing that here with our current administration. You sure aren't seeing it with the guy at the top. He doesn't give a shit about anybody but himself. And that has to change. We need to see more compassion. We need to see people treating each other with more respect. I mean, my God, that's part of the human condition. I mean, when somebody opens a door for you, a simple thing like that, I mean, that lifts you up, right? Or
Right.
if somebody does a kind gesture, pat somebody on the back or just say, hey, that's a good job, we need more of that kind of a thing, not talking people down, making fun of people, calling people names. I mean, for God's sakes, that's grade school stuff. And it really bothers me as a Freemason. And I'm, but the other reason why I talk about politics is because we are living through um, a really, really difficult time. And we're on a precipice here with humanity, and we need to get our act together or we're not going to make it. It's that simple. And it starts by being kind to each other and respecting each other and not treating, somebody like garbage because they talk different, they look different, they're from a different country. I mean, this is insanity. And that's part of the message that I want to make sure that I give. And I don't care if people don't like it, because if you don't like it, that means that you are not the kind of person that I want to be around. And that's that. I mean, you can talk straight, you can have disagreements, but at the end of the day, let's just agree to disagree, treat each other with respect. And I got the first round, man. Let's go talk about things that we have in common. And we just need to see more of that, especially in our country.
I agree. And you mentioned how the Templars were with the Virgin Mary. I always thought that the Mary that they were venerating and like the sacred rose symbol to was Mary Magdalene. Is
Yep,
that
Mary. Yep, yep, absolutely. And the truth of the matter is, the leadership of the Templars, their ideological and biological ancestor was Jesus and Mary Magdalene, John the Baptist, and the Essenic tradition. And then it goes back even farther into Egypt and to the Atlanteans over 13,000 years ago. And, some people, when I say that, they go, oh my God, how can that be? That can't be true. And I say, look, just to step back for a sec. There are over 8 billion people on the planet walking around today, right? That's a fact. And every single one of us have ancestors that were alive 2,000 years ago, right?
right?
That's a fact. Nobody's going to argue with that. And if you do, you're a fool. But it's true. So, why is it such a big deal that these two people who were married and had at least two children? Actually, she had three. She had one with John the Baptist before she married Jesus. And Jesus was actually obligated to marry her after John the Baptist was beheaded. And that's a whole nother story. But the point is this: why is it such a stretch to say that their children couldn't have had children and their children have children and so on all the way to this day? In fact, hello, it happens all the time. So to me, it's not a big deal, but I happen to know that it is true. Now, I'm going to say something right now that's kind of controversial, but then I'm going to put it into context. I am also part of that lineage, but it doesn't make me special because there's probably millions of people that are descended from these two people. And according to the genealogy that I've had done, I'm part of that bloodline. But okay, that's great. It's kind of cool, but it doesn't mean anything to me because there's a whole bunch of other people that have that. But that doesn't make us special. Um, but but they did venerate that heritage, that lineage, and Jesus and Mary Magdalene and John the Baptist and the rest of them. They were important people in their time. They weren't who the church makes them out to be. The resurrection never happened, I'm sorry to say, until I see someone rise from the dead or I see a virgin birth. I'm not buying it. And most women I talk to aren't buying that virgin birth thing either.
As you mentioned, Jesus and Mary Magdalene having kids. One thing that is buried deep in the church, but is a part of the church lore, I always find is interesting, is they talk about the last scion, who is supposed to be the descendant of Jesus, who is supposed to help bring about the end of times. He's plays a role in that. But then I'm like, when you say Jesus never had kids, how do you have a last Zion? It's like, wait a minute.
Well, I think it's a metaphor. I don't think, the way it's presented is it makes it sounds like the world's going to end or everybody's going to die, and that's not what it is. I think what they're referring to um, is the time period that we're living through right now. Are you familiar with something called precession of the equinoxes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then you know that we are right now transitioning from the end of the age of Pisces the fish to Aquarius, right? The feminine
Right.
water bearer. You're familiar with that, right?
Right. Yes.
And you understand that precession of the equinoxes, which is the movement of the 12 constellations of the zodiac through the eastern sky. It takes exactly, well, approximately, I should say, 26,000 years for one cycle to complete, right? Um, and so when you divide that by 12, you get about 2,160 something years. But the interval between these ages is not divided equally. It depends on the size of the constellation. And it's measured on the spring equinox at sunrise. When that constellation is sitting in the eastern horizon and the sun rises through it, that is considered a sacred age. And whatever constellation that is, that's it. Now, getting back to the 26,000 year long cycle, that's a hell of a long time, right?
Right.
And we are now transitioning from Pisces to Aquarius. But what is also happening that most people don't understand is that Pisces is the end of the 26,000 year long cycle. That's what people were talking about in 2012 when they talked about the end of the Mayan calendar. You remember that? And they
Yes.
were talking about the end of the world. Well, it wasn't the end of the world, it was the end of one very long cycle. But what happens when one cycle ends? A
Another
new
one
one
begins.
a new one begins, right? And so that's what's happening right now. Now, the Mayan calendar ended in 2012. So, according to them, we're already into Aquarius. However, there are other calendars, other traditions that have different calendars. And most of them say that the transition happens in 2025 to 2026, right now. And so this mention of difficulty, of strife, of what the end of something is talking about that. And so it's not the end. It's just the end of a cycle, but the new one is beginning. But the prophecies that have been around for millennia say that this time the transition from one cycle to the next in procession is going to be a time of great upheaval, of great difficulties, great challenges. And that's exactly what we're experiencing, not just politically, but our planet is saying, stop, give me a break. This is another thing that I can't stand about the current administration. They don't care about the planet. Um, they don't. They just yeah, they just want to go ahead and continue on, not do anything about pollution, not doing anything about conservation, about taking care of our water, taking care of our resources. They just want to exploit for the sake of money. Well, what good is money if you live in a shithole? And I'm just saying it frank. That's what we're up against. And, we need to make some serious choices as a species. If we want to continue on and, I want to try to make the world a better place. That is why I do this. That's why I speak out and I say controversial things. I'm just telling people the truth. And I want to make this world a better place for my kids, for my grandkids, and the ones I'll never meet because we're only here for a short time. And I feel fortunate that for whatever reason, I've been able to be on a show like this, to have a platform, to hopefully have some credibility so people will listen to what I'm saying and take it to heart and make those changes that we all have to make if we want to go into the future successfully. I love this planet. I love the people that I call my friends and family. And I want the world to be a better place. I've got beautiful grandchildren, and I want them to have the same experience you and I had growing up in this wonderful planet that is just so beautiful and gives us so much, and all we do is shit on her. I mean, my God, you don't, defecate in your living room, do you? Well, why are we doing it to our planet? This is our home. And so, we're up against it right now, and we have to decide how we want to go forward. And that's why I'm speaking out. And I'm sorry if I'm getting spun up, but that's my jam, man.
Oh no, you're fine, and I just want to make awareness that we are at the hour mark, a little
Oh,
bit over. So I don't know if you have time to go longer, or if you have somewhere to be.
well, we can go for a little bit longer. That's okay. It's only 9 o'clock here. My phone. I've been getting texts. I just got to tell you a quick story. I have a really good friend. I've known him for probably 35 years. And if there's people listening that live in Minnesota, you'll probably recognize the name Don Shelby. Don Shelby was a news anchor in our market here in Minneapolis for about 35 years on WCCO TV. And he's like, one of the founding fathers of Minnesota, very well respected, a super smart guy. And he was actually a guest on my show a number of times. And he was sort of that, person one of the guys I would go to, that I would seek advice for. You're a very smart guy, wonderful historian. And he's actually reviewing right now. Last Saturday, I gave him a copy, a draft of the next book, and he's been reading it and emailing me the last couple days, and he's texting me right now, and so I'll hit him up when we're done, so don't worry about it. But things are happening right now, and the fact that he's texting and emailing, and I'll tell you what, he's also an investigative reporter, and that's one of the things that he and I have always had in common is the process of investigation. And I told Don on Saturday, I said, "Look, man," I said, if there's something you don't like, if there's something that doesn't make sense, if you see a problem, tell me, and hit me and hit me hard. That's the kind of help that I need. I don't want people just saying, "Oh, that's great, I love it, it's part of it." I don't need that. I need people to tell me how it can be better, if I've made some mistakes, if something doesn't make sense. So I really, really appreciate that. And I'm dying to know what he's finding, because he's hitting me up and I can't read it right now. But anyway, so that's what's going on.
Fair enough. And one question I have for you that can be Knights Templar related or not is, if you were to start up, say, America Unearthed again,
Yeah.
what would be like some of the topics that you're hearing about going on right now that you're like, I would really love to delve into?
Oh my God. Well, there are many aspects of this Templar story that I would love to delve into. There are some places where I think there actually might be some treasure. Um, and I'll be honest with you, I know a lot about what the treasures are. And yes, a lot of it is gold and silver coins, artifacts, and things, like that, and jewels. But the stuff that interests me are the relics and the other stuff. Money's nice. I mean, everybody likes money, but money's boring. I mean, we know what we can do. Money buys convenience, but artifacts and documents to me are just eminently fascinating. And so I would love to go and see if we can find a couple of the treasures that I think are still out there. And no, they're not on Oak Island. Um, they're in other places. Um, Another thing I would like to do, maybe you heard about it, this summer was when they went public with it. It was actually discovered, I think, about 7 or 8 years ago, something called the Wawa Runestone. Have you heard of it? Up in
No.
Wawa, Ontario. on the north side of Lake Superior. And it's a runic inscription that's carved into the bedrock. And apparently there's some ships carved with it. There are some X's. I'd love to know if there's hooks on them. I've seen some photographs, but and I've had a lot of people tell me about it, but I just say, look, I don't have anything to say until I get my eyeballs on it. I don't trust photographs. I need to see it myself. And I'm hoping to get up there this coming summer to take a look at that. But man, if we could do something like that on America on Earth or whatever, again, that would be great. It's interesting you say that because, we did 3 seasons of America on Earth from, 2013 to 2015, and then they put us on hold, and they sold H2 History 2 back in the day. That's what we were on initially, and then we were off for 3 years. I mean, I did some other television stuff, but then America on Earth came back in 2019 for a fourth season, but then COVID hit, and it just that type of boots on the ground um, programming just wasn't feasible anymore. So and I don't know if I want to do America on Earth the way we did it again. um I mean, physically I could do it. I'm getting to be a lot older now. I don't know if people want to look at some gray-haired donkey running around, but um there are some things that I still want to do when it comes to this whole Templar story, to get it out to the world, because I want it to be accepted. Because I think once people know the truth about who the Templars are, how they went about founding this nation, maybe we'll get back to the original tenets and, make this place the respected, you know, house on the hill that everybody looked up to, because that's not where we are right now. But I believe we can get back there. And I think we have to go back. When something's broken, sometimes you just got to tear it apart and rebuild it again. But we have that foundation of the tenets and principles upon which this nation was built. And we have to stick to those. We have to honor those. And we have to believe in those, and we have to walk the talk. And I believe we can do it. I think Americans have it in them. And look, we all make mistakes, and it's not necessarily you know what you do. It's how you fix it. If you make a mistake, you own up to it, and then you get about fixing it. And I think that's what we need to do, and I think we will do it. I'm optimistic. I'm going to do my part, and my part is to speak up and say what I believe to be the truth.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I do have an interesting question from a friend of mine, Derek, in the
Okay.
chat room. He's asking, was there a relationship between the Templars and the Cathars?
Of course. Absolutely. The Cathars were probably the purest Christians of all, Gnostic Christians, of course. um, and they were probably practicing the truest um, rites and traditions that Jesus was teaching. I mean, what the church is talking about now is not what Jesus was teaching. One of the most important things, and maybe this is a good thing to and of course, the Roman Church was going to have none of that, and they wiped the Cathars out. But Catharism did not die. They did not kill them all. There are still Cathars, and they are still closely aligned with the Templar traditions to this day. They just went underground, and like the Templars did, but we're still here, and they're still here. But there's something very interesting in the new book. You're going to read about these amazing messages that the Templars, their information that they preserved, they protected, and they encrypted. And in many cases, and we have about 30 messages so far that we have been able to decipher. And the difficult part is just because you decipher one message doesn't mean you're automatically going to get the next one, because they're all encrypted differently. And it's a pain in the butt, let me tell you. It's a real challenge, but we've been able to decipher pretty much all of them. I don't think there's any we haven't deciphered. But a number of them use a cipher phrase that's mandatory to be able to solve the code and decode it, right? So there was the longest message that we have deciphered is over 6,600 characters, 6,609 to be exact. And there is a particular cipher phrase that we were able to figure out what it was. And it's kind of cool the way they hide the cipher phrase. Sometimes in an anagram, do you know what an anagram is?
Right, when they mix up the letters.
They mix up the letters and you have to figure out what the word is, right? Um, so in this particular one, the cipher phrase is at the top, and then you put these groups of symbols um, alphabetically within that phrase, and then you read it this way. I mean, it's really hard to put this together carefully and keep everything straight. And as we were decoding this message, the cipher phrase would appear again in the message about every 15 to 20 lines. And the reason they did that was to make sure that you were on the right track. Because if you didn't get the cipher phrase again, you screwed it up and you had to go back and fix what you'd just done. The cipher phrase occurs 13 times within this long message. And it took 2.5 months to decode it, even though we knew what to do. It was that difficult. And I can't tell you how many times I didn't get the right word. I'm like, oh God, I got to go back. But the message is very profound. It's basically history. It talks about Oak Island in some parts, but it talks about other things too. It's quite lengthy. But the cipher phrase, I can now tell you, was the message that Jesus was teaching. And I say that on good authority. And I think this might be what I want to leave your audience with to think about, because it's going to rock them a little bit. But if you stop and think about it, it's true. It's prophetic, and it's the word. The cipher phrase is this: the power of God is within you. That was his message. And not only is it in you, it's in your partner, it's in your kids, it's in your friends, it's in all of us. That is why when human beings are getting along, when you feel that energy, when you feel that vibe, that collective consciousness that's in all of us. You know how you feel when you listen to your favorite song or you go to a concert and you're just rocking and everybody in the house is feeling it?
Oh yeah, all tingly
That's,
and yeah.
yeah, that's the power of God in everyone, because it's in every single one of us. It's not some guy out there that's, watching football players score touchdowns, because that's nonsense. And I'm sorry to tell that to the Roman Christians, but it's the truth. And that cipher phrase appears in multiple messages, and in some cases is the message. And that's what he was teaching. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you. And I have one theory I want to ask if it's okay before we end this,
Yeah.
and you can confirm it or say can't talk about it. But is there more than one Grawl?
Say again.
Is there more than one Grail?
Well, that's a great question. Um, First of all, you have to define what the Grail is. The Grail is different things to different people. Um, to some people, it's a cup, that was used at the Last Supper. To some people, it's treasure. To some people, it's the Ark of the Covenant. To some people, it's the womb of Mary Magdalene, the womb of all females, that carries on the bloodline. To some people, the Grail was the establishment of that sanctuary we now call United States of America. It's many things to different people. So I kind of like the fact that there is no right or wrong definition of the Grail. The Grail is what you think it is. What it just depends on your point of view what the Grail is. To some people, the Grail is spiritual awakening, finding that peace within yourself, that God within you, when you realize that you have control over your own happiness, over your own destiny, and that strength that comes from within you. And I think the more you think about that, I think you're going to realize that maybe that's what the Grail is.
That's what I think is it's within us, and so thank you for sharing that. And I want to give you a chance to, because we've talked about your book here and there, to promote your book and
Oh,
all
okay.
your books and what you
Yeah.
have coming up if you'd like.
Well, it's a very busy time right now, and there's a lot of things that are going to be happening here in the next few months. Well, this is the book that I just published. Although it is not officially going to be released to the public to be able to buy it on Amazon and other distributors until February 10th. The only place you can get one is off my website, which is scottfwolter.com. But I sign and personalize every book that is bought off my website. And I've been selling this book like crazy because I'm telling you, it is, and it's not because I'm a fabulous writer. It's not. It's the journals that we present in here, and we and it starts in the 14th century with a young Earl Henry Sinclair, whose father gives him a journal on his 8th birthday. And the number 8 is very important. It's very sacred. It's one of the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence. The next number is 13. That's why you see the association with the Templars, the number 13. People don't understand what that means. The church has demonized the number 13 when in fact it's the number of the goddess. So you can start to see how the church has been the antagonist in this story and continues to be. But I think, I mean, even in buildings for a long time, they didn't have a 13th floor because it was bad luck, right? Well, that's bullshit. It's actually a sacred, beautiful number that is symbolic of the sacred feminine. But in any case, he gets the journal when he's 8 years old, and he writes all the way through his life until it's his turn to bring the treasures to North America in 1395 and 1398. And then he passes the journals to his son, William, whose obligation is to continue the covenant of checking on those treasures, traveling to North America to make sure that those treasures are safe, and because that treasure was to be used for someday, when the time came to use that wealth to establish this new sanctuary. And that obligation was passed on through 15 generations over 4 centuries. And there were 5 generations in the Sinclair clan, and then the journals were passed on to the Weems clan, who back then and to this very day in Scotland, that family are shipping barons. So obviously they had the means to come over and check on the treasures. There's one other thing I want to say about this whole mission that was called the Covenant, is that when Earl Henry came over to North America, he and the Templars that he brought with him, he didn't just bring the treasures, he brought 120 remaining Knights Templar, the descendants of those that escaped France in 1307, who fought at Bannockburn, the greatest battle in the history of Scotland when they defeated the British. There's been a long-standing rumors that the Templars helped them defeat the British in battle, and the journals tell us that story is true. But Earl Henry and his men brought over 120 remaining descendants of those Knights Templar, and they stayed in North America, in part to guard those treasures. But when they went over here, they also formed a deep spiritual bond with the indigenous people, and they bonded through ritual and intermarriage. And they said to Earl Henry and his men, and to the subsequent Weems and Sinclair descendants that came later, "You are our brothers. Gold and silver means nothing to us. But if you want us to guard these treasures, we will do that for you." And they did for over 4 centuries. And look how we repaid them with genocide, right? But
Right.
I will tell you, they still know the story. And you don't have to believe me. Talk to them because they still know. And next year, when we start patting ourselves on the back with this great country that we have, we cannot forget the 46 men that went up there to recover those treasures and the 6 slaves that went up there with them who received their manumission. Do you know what that word means? I didn't when I read it in the journals. It means to give a slave their freedom. And we also cannot forget our indigenous brothers who guarded those treasures for 400 years. The story is much bigger, it's much better, and it's more beautiful than even the story that we were told about the founding of this country. So when you read this book, you are going to be amazed. And the details are what I dug into. And the last chapter is called Analysis. And I did my best to try to find the evidence that was consistent, cohesive, and conclusive that this story was right. The journals came to me in 2016, but it took me just under 10 years to vet them because when I went public with them, I knew how great this story was, but I had to make sure that to the best of my ability, I can sit here and tell you and the people that are listening that this story is true. So there you go. So scottfwolter.com. Order the book. I'll sign it for you. I'll write your name and I'll get it out before Christmas if you do it. And then be ready for the next book because it'll be just as good, if not better than this one.
So thank you for that, and thank you for trusting me to be a guest on my show because I know not all podcast shows are the same, and so thank you for trusting in me.
Well, thank you for having me, man. And look, I don't sit there and worry about how big somebody is, a podcaster. Everybody has to start somewhere, and maybe someday you're going to be a big shot, and I'm going to say, hey, do you remember me? So it's all good, man.
Well, thank you. And before we go, I'd like to say from my heart and the heart of my show to you, thank you for what you're doing and exposing the truth and bringing to light the truth of what's going on.
Well, thank you for that. All I can say is I'm just going to keep doing what I think is right. And so far, it seems to be working out pretty good. And I'm going to do it till I drop, man. That's that I can promise you.
Well, hopefully it won't be anytime soon.
Well, I hope so too. I'm having a good time. So, Well, thank you, Michael, and let's do it again soon, eh?
Yes. Thank you, and we will. And so please like, subscribe, and follow along because you'll never know when Scott will make his appearance in season 4.
Oh, you mean on America on Earth?
Oh, my show,
Oh,
actually.
your show. Oh, I thought you were talking about my show. Anyway, well, that sounds good. Season 4, man. I'll be ready.
Hey, I'm matching your record. 4 seasons.
There you go. You'll pass me up. That's okay.
Well, for now, but I have a feeling your show will be back
Well, we'll see. All right,
in
man.
one
Well,
way or
listen, thanks.
another.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to go have one for real. This was lemonade. I'm going to add a little sauce in here now. That'll be my nightcap.
So thank you, and thank you to everyone, and happy holidays to everyone. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you on the next one. Good night, everyone.